When you've been married for nearly 4 decades, you learn the rhythm of another person's life. You know the sound of their footsteps. You recognize the way they breathe when they're asleep. You can tell something is wrong before a single word is spoken. That's how I knew something in my house had shifted long before I found any proof. My name is Thomas Reed. I was 62 years old, semi-retired, and I believed I had earned a quiet life. I believed my wife, Elaine, and I had survived everything together: raising kids, layoffs, illnesses, disappointments, long nights, and longer years. I believed loyalty was the one thing that never cracked. I was wrong. It started with little things. Elaine stopped asking about my day. She used to sit at the kitchen table when I came home, coffee cup in her hands, asking questions she already knew the answers to just because she liked hearing me talk. Then one day, she didn't. Her phone became more important than my presence. She laughed at messages she wouldn't show me. She tilted the screen away when I walked past. At first, I blamed myself. Age does that to you. You assume you've become boring, predictable, invisible. Then came the life insurance paperwork. Elaine insisted we review our policies just to be organized. She'd never cared about paperwork before. But suddenly she wanted to know exact numbers. Coverage amounts. Beneficiaries. She asked what would happen if something unexpected happened to me. I joked about it. Told her she'd be stuck with my old truck and my bad habits. She didn't laugh. A week later, I noticed my pills looked different. Same bottle. Same label. But something about the color seemed off. I'd been taking the same heart medication for years. I knew those pills the way a smoker knows his lighter. Still, I convinced myself it was a manufacturer change. I should have listened to the quiet voice in my head then. The real fracture came on a Thursday afternoon when I came home early. My golf game got rained out, and I decided to surprise Elaine. I pulled into the driveway and saw a car I recognized immediately. My son-in-law's. Mark Lewis. 34. Confident. Charismatic. The kind of man who could make you feel like you were friends even when you weren't. He'd married my daughter, Rachel, 6 years earlier. I'd helped him with a down payment on his first business venture. I defended him when he forgot birthdays and missed holidays. Seeing his car there while Rachel was working a double shift made my stomach tighten. I walked into my own house quietly. The television was off. Voices came from the kitchen. Elaine's voice sounded lighter than it had in months. Younger. I heard Mark laugh, low and familiar. When I stepped into the doorway, Elaine jumped like she'd been burned. Tom, what are you doing home? Mark turned slowly, already composed, already smiling. Hey, Tom. Just checking on that cabinet hinge you mentioned. I looked at the cabinet. Perfectly fine. Something passed between them. It wasn't dramatic. It was practiced. Mark left quickly. Elaine spent the rest of the evening overly attentive, touching my arm, asking if I felt okay, offering to make my favorite dinner. It felt rehearsed. Like a performance meant to distract. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake beside a woman I suddenly didn't recognize, listening to her breathing, wondering how someone could feel so close and so far away at the same time. I didn't confront her. Confrontation gives liars time to prepare better lies. Instead, I listened. I started paying attention to patterns. Mark only visited when I was busy. Elaine took phone calls in the garage. She began cooking meals heavy with salt, despite knowing my doctor had warned against it. I told my doctor I'd misplaced my medication and needed a refill early. When I showed him the pills from my bottle, his face changed. These aren't what you've been prescribed, he said slowly. The room felt very small. I drove home shaking. I didn't tell Elaine. I didn't accuse her. I didn't throw anything. I sat in my car and stared at my house like it was a stranger's. That's when fear turned into clarity. They weren't just cheating. They were planning my death. I needed proof. Not suspicion. Not intuition. Proof that could stand on its own when everything else collapsed. I bought a small audio recorder under the excuse of recording lectures at the community center. I placed it where conversations drifted freely, where secrets felt safe. Then I waited. 2 days later, I heard my own death discussed casually, like a budget meeting. Mark's voice was calm. Confident. Elaine's was excited, almost relieved. They talked about timing. About making it look natural. About the insurance payout and what life would be like after. They talked about me like I was already gone. I sat alone in my car listening, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my fingers went numb. 38 years of marriage reduced to a financial inconvenience. They didn't know I was listening. They didn't know I had copies of everything. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I planned. I took the recordings to a lawyer first. Not a friend. Not family. Someone who understood consequences. Then I went to the police. What followed wasn't dramatic. It was methodical. Investigators uncovered more than I ever imagined. Mark had debts Elaine didn't know about. Elaine had been quietly adjusting documents. There were text messages, financial anomalies, pharmacy irregularities. And then there were other women. Elaine wasn't special. She was useful. Mark had been building contingencies, other relationships, other financial angles. My daughter's marriage was collateral damage in a larger game. When the arrests came, they were quiet. No shouting. No handcuffs in the driveway. Just two people escorted out separately, faces pale, mouths open but finally out of words. Rachel didn't scream when she found out. She went silent. The kind of silence that changes a person permanently. I told her the truth carefully. I didn't poison her memory with rage. I gave her facts. Evidence. Time. The trial took months. The recordings were undeniable. The insurance motive sealed it. Elaine cried in court. Mark didn't. They were convicted on conspiracy charges. Fraud. Attempted murder. When the judge read the sentence, I didn't feel joy. I felt peace. Not because they were punished, but because I survived. After everything was over, people asked me how I stayed so calm. How I didn't lose control. How I didn't seek revenge. The truth is simple. I didn't need revenge. I needed the truth to be louder than their lies. I go fishing now. I drink my coffee slowly. I rebuilt my life quietly, piece by piece. Rachel visits every Sunday. We talk about normal things. Safe things. Sometimes she asks how I knew what to do. I tell her this. When someone plans your death, they expect you to panic. They expect you to disappear quietly. The most dangerous thing you can do is stay alive and let the truth finish the job. And it always does. The weeks after the sentencing moved strangely. Too fast and too slow at the same time. One moment I was sitting in a courtroom listening to a judge pronounce years of prison time, and the next I was standing alone in my kitchen, staring at 2 coffee mugs when I only needed one. Silence settles differently after betrayal. It isn't peaceful. It's heavy. It echoes. Elaine's side of the closet stayed untouched for a long time. I didn't have the energy to pack it. Not because I missed her, but because touching those clothes felt like touching a version of my life that had never really existed. Every sweater, every scarf, every neatly folded blouse felt like evidence from a crime scene. Rachel stayed with me for a while. She slept in her old bedroom, the one with the faint glow-in-the-dark stars still stuck to the ceiling from when she was 10. Some nights I heard her crying softly. Other nights, she stayed awake, scrolling endlessly on her phone, looking for answers that didn't exist. One evening, about a month after the trial, she finally spoke the words she'd been holding in. Did Mom ever love you? The question landed like a weight on my chest. I thought carefully before answering. I didn't want to poison her memories. She deserved something cleaner than my bitterness. I think she did, I said. At least at one point. But love that isn't protected, nurtured, or respected can rot. And when it does, it doesn't just disappear. It turns into something dangerous. Rachel nodded, staring at the floor. I keep replaying everything. Wondering how I missed it. How I married someone who could do this. You didn't miss it, I said gently. He hid it. Predators don't announce themselves. They blend in. That's how they survive. She exhaled shakily, like she'd been holding her breath for weeks. The community reacted in waves. At first, there was shock. Then sympathy. Then curiosity. People wanted details. They wanted drama. I gave them none. I learned quickly that silence preserves dignity better than explanations ever could. Neighbors brought food. Old friends reached out. Some apologized for not seeing it sooner, as if that would have changed anything. It wouldn't have. One afternoon, I received a letter from Elaine's sister. It was short. Careful. Full of apologies that didn't quite reach the core of what had happened. She asked if I hated Elaine. I stared at the paper for a long time before answering. I didn't hate her. Hate requires energy. It ties you to the person who hurt you. I was done being tied to her in any way. What I felt was something quieter. Final. The house eventually started to feel like mine again. I repainted the bedroom. I moved the furniture. I replaced the locks, not because I was afraid, but because closing doors is sometimes necessary to open windows. I went back to my routines. Early mornings. Long walks. Coffee at the same diner where the waitress never asked questions and always refilled my cup without being asked. People there didn't know my story. To them, I was just another older man reading the paper, watching the world move past the window. That anonymity felt like healing. One morning, as I sat there, a man about my age struck up a conversation. He talked about his wife, his worries, his suspicion that something felt off at home. I didn't interrupt. I didn't advise. I just listened. When he finished, he looked at me expectantly. "What would you do?" he asked. I folded my newspaper slowly. I'd trust my instincts. And I'd gather the truth quietly before confronting anything. Loud reactions give liars room to escape. He nodded, thoughtful. I don't know what happened after that. But I hoped he'd heard what he needed to hear. Months passed. Seasons changed. The court process wrapped up completely. Elaine's name became something I saw only on legal documents, not something that lived in my thoughts. Rachel filed for divorce. It was finalized quickly. There was nothing left to argue over. Mark's charm didn't help him behind bars. It never does. One evening, Rachel and I sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the trees. The air was warm, the sky streaked with orange and purple. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't found out?" she asked. I did think about it. More than I liked to admit. I probably wouldn't be here, I said honestly. And that's why I don't regret a single step I took afterward. She reached for my hand. "I'm glad you're here." "So am I." That night, after she went to bed, I stood alone in the quiet house. I realized something then, something important. Surviving something like that doesn't make you stronger in the way people like to talk about. It doesn't turn you into steel or fire. It makes you clearer. Clear about who deserves access to your life. Clear about the value of your time. Clear about the difference between peace and comfort. Elaine and Mark had wanted a clean ending. Something quiet. Something easy. Instead, they got exposure. Consequences. Truth. And I got to wake up every morning knowing that the story didn't end the way they planned. People sometimes ask if I believe in karma. I don't know about karma. But I believe in patterns. And I believe that lies collapse under their own weight when given enough time and light. The most powerful thing I did wasn't recording conversations or calling the police. It was refusing to disappear. It was staying alive long enough to let the truth speak for itself. And it always does. Life has a way of testing what you think you know about yourself. After everything settled, after the noise faded and the headlines disappeared, I found myself facing a quieter question. Who was I now? For a long time, my identity had been tied to being a husband. A provider. A man who kept things steady so everyone else could lean without fear. When that role was ripped away, it left an empty outline where certainty used to be. At first, that emptiness scared me. Then I realized it was freedom. I started doing things simply because I wanted to. Not because they fit into anyone else's expectations. I took a road trip north, driving with no destination in mind. I stopped at small towns, ate at places with handwritten menus, talked to strangers who would never know my name. There was something healing about being unknown. One afternoon, months later, I received a call from the detective who had handled my case. He told me the investigation had expanded. Mark's activities reached farther than anyone initially suspected. More victims had come forward. More charges were added. You probably saved more lives than you realize, he said. I sat quietly after hanging up, letting that sink in. I never wanted to be a hero. I just didn't want to be a victim. Rachel began to smile again. Not the forced kind, but real smiles that reached her eyes. She started talking about future plans, about maybe moving, maybe starting over somewhere new. I'm not running, she told me one night. I'm choosing. That distinction mattered. As for Elaine, I didn't follow updates. I didn't check on her status. Some doors don't need to be reopened, even for closure. Closure doesn't always come from answers. Sometimes it comes from acceptance. People still stop me occasionally. They recognize my face from articles or local news stories. They ask how I knew. How I stayed ahead. How I didn't fall apart. I tell them the truth. I did fall apart. I just didn't let anyone see it until it was safe. Strength isn't loud. It's patient. It waits until the moment when it matters most. One evening, sitting alone with the windows open and the sound of crickets drifting in, I thought about how easily everything could have ended differently. How close I came to being erased quietly, efficiently, without a trace. That thought used to terrify me. Now it reminds me how precious time is. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: betrayal doesn't always come from enemies. Sometimes it wears the face of someone you trusted completely. And when it does, your survival depends not on anger, but awareness. Pay attention to patterns. Listen to the silence between words. Trust the feeling that tells you something isn't right, even when you can't explain it yet. Because the truth doesn't rush. It waits for you to be ready. And when it comes out, it doesn't need help destroying lies. Lies collapse on their own. I didn't win because I was smarter or stronger. I won because I stayed alive long enough to let the truth do what it always does in the end. Finish the story. In the end, there wasn't a dramatic final scene. No sudden twist. No last confrontation where everyone said the perfect words. There was just a morning. I woke up early, as I usually did, and stepped outside with my coffee. The air was cool. The street was quiet. A bird landed on the fence across from me and tilted its head, like it was deciding whether I belonged there. For the first time in a long time, I felt completely present. The house no longer felt haunted by memories. It felt lived in again. Mine. Rachel eventually moved into her own place not far away. She still came over every Sunday. We cooked together. Talked about ordinary things: work, weather, plans for the week. Sometimes we talked about the past, but it no longer controlled the room when we did. One afternoon, she looked at me and said something that stayed with me. You didn't just survive, Dad. You showed me how to survive without becoming bitter. I didn't know how to respond to that. I just nodded and squeezed her hand. The truth is, bitterness would have been easy. Hatred would have been justified. But carrying those emotions would have meant they were still shaping my life. And I'd already lost enough time to people who didn't deserve it. Elaine faded into the background of my life the way storms do once they pass. I didn't wish her harm. I didn't wish her well. I wished her accountability, and she got it. Mark's name became a cautionary tale. A reminder people shared quietly. A warning passed between neighbors and families. His charm didn't survive the light. It never does. Sometimes, late at night, I think about how close I came to never seeing any of this. Never watching another sunrise. Never sitting across from my daughter at the kitchen table. Never reclaiming my own story. That's when gratitude hits hardest. Not loud gratitude. Not celebratory gratitude. Quiet gratitude. The kind that settles into your bones and stays. If there's anything worth taking from my story, it isn't about revenge or cleverness or even justice. It's this. Pay attention when life whispers before it starts screaming. Trust yourself when something feels wrong, even if you can't yet explain why. And remember that survival isn't always about fighting, it's about enduring long enough to let the truth surface. They planned my death for insurance money. They expected silence. Panic. Disappearance. Instead, I stayed. I listened. And I let the law finish what the truth began. That's how my story ends. Not with anger. Not with revenge. But with me still here. And yet, even after everything I'd said, even after all the endings I thought I'd reached, life had one last quiet chapter to write. A year passed. No court dates. No phone calls from lawyers. No envelopes stamped with government seals. Just seasons changing outside my windows. Just days stacking on top of one another, ordinary and calm. I learned that healing doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in small permissions you give yourself. Permission to laugh without guilt. Permission to enjoy a meal without replaying the past. Permission to plan something without wondering who might betray you next. One morning, while sorting through old paperwork, I found a photograph tucked into a folder I hadn't opened in years. Elaine and I, decades younger, standing on a beach, sunburned and smiling. For a long moment, I studied it. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel sadness. I felt distance. That was when I knew I was finally free. I put the photo back, not out of sentiment, but out of acknowledgement. That life existed. It ended. This one continued. Later that day, I took a long walk through my neighborhood. People waved. Kids rode bicycles. Someone was grilling, the smell of smoke and spices hanging in the air. The world hadn't stopped when mine nearly had. It never does. That realization used to hurt. Now it comforted me. I sat on a bench at the park and watched the sky slowly shift colors. I thought about how close I came to being erased without a sound. How easily a life can be reduced to paperwork and payouts if no one is watching. That's the part people don't like to talk about. Evil doesn't always announce itself with violence or rage. Sometimes it arrives quietly, disguised as familiarity, patience, and smiles you've seen 1,000 times before. The reason I'm telling this story isn't to shock anyone. It's not to relive pain. It's to remind people that awareness is not paranoia, and caution is not weakness. If something feels wrong, it probably is. If someone suddenly changes when there's money involved, pay attention. And if you ever find yourself standing at the edge of a truth that scares you, remember this: looking away doesn't make it disappear. It only gives it time to grow. I didn't survive because I was fearless. I survived because I chose to see clearly. And clarity, once you have it, is stronger than fear. So this is where my story truly ends, not in a courtroom, not in a hospital, not in betrayal. But on an ordinary evening, sitting quietly, alive, with my future finally belonging to me. They planned my death. They failed. And every morning I wake up as proof that sometimes the greatest victory is simply refusing to vanish. Even now, when I tell this story, people assume it must still haunt me. That I wake up angry. That I replay conversations in my head, imagining what I should have said or done differently. But the truth is quieter than that. Time doesn't erase what happened, it reframes it. What once felt like the center of my life now feels like a chapter that taught me how to read people more clearly. I don't live suspiciously. I live attentively. There's a difference. I still believe in trust. I just no longer give it blindly. Sometimes, late in the evening, I sit by the window with a book and think about how close I came to being reduced to a line item on an insurance form. A payout. A natural cause. A story no one would have questioned too deeply. That thought used to make my chest tighten. Now it strengthens my resolve. Because I know how easily quiet people are underestimated. How often patience is mistaken for weakness. How many assume kindness means compliance. They were wrong about me. And they're wrong about a lot of people. Rachel once told me that my story helped her learn how to trust herself again. That watching me stay calm, gather the truth, and let consequences unfold taught her more than any advice ever could. That meant more to me than any verdict. If there's one thing I hope people understand after hearing this, it's that survival isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's invisible. Sometimes it looks like restraint. Like silence. Like choosing not to explode when everything inside you wants to. The world rewards loud reactions. But truth favors the patient. They planned my death thinking I wouldn't notice. They thought time was on their side. In the end, time chose me. And that's something no amount of money, lies, or betrayal can ever take away. There's a strange moment that comes after everything is finally over, when you realize the danger is gone but your body hasn't caught up yet. For a long time, I still checked the locks twice before bed. I still examined small changes too closely. I still woke up some nights with my heart racing, convinced something was wrong even when everything was quiet. Healing doesn't announce itself. It sneaks in while you're busy living. One morning, I noticed I'd slept through the night without waking once. No dreams. No tension. Just rest. That's when I understood that my mind had finally accepted what my heart already knew: I was safe. I started volunteering a few mornings a week at a local community center. Nothing heavy. Just helping with paperwork, answering phones, listening. You'd be surprised how many people want to talk when they sense you won't judge them. Stories came out: marriages unraveling, financial betrayals, quiet fears people didn't know how to name. I never told my full story unless someone asked. When I did, I kept it simple. Not because I was hiding anything, but because the lesson didn't need drama. Pay attention. Trust patterns, not promises. And never assume silence means nothing is happening. One afternoon, a woman about my age sat across from me, twisting her wedding ring nervously. She said something felt wrong at home but she couldn't explain why. She was afraid of being wrong. Afraid of overreacting. You don't have to accuse, I told her. You just have to observe. Truth doesn't mind being watched. She left calmer than she arrived. That was enough. Rachel's life kept moving forward too. She rebuilt slowly, deliberately. New routines. New boundaries. Not rushing anything. Watching who showed consistency, not charm. Watching who respected her time. We never talked much about Elaine anymore. Not out of denial, but because there was nothing left to say. Some relationships don't need closure, they end when they reveal their true shape. On the anniversary of the day everything came to light, I took myself out to breakfast. Same diner. Same window seat. Same waitress who smiled and poured coffee without asking. I raised the cup slightly, just to myself. To survival. To clarity. To staying. People often think stories like mine are about revenge. They're not. Revenge is loud and consuming. This was about preservation. About refusing to be erased quietly. About choosing to live with eyes open instead of closing them for comfort. They planned my death carefully. Thoughtfully. Patiently. What they didn't plan for was my awareness. And that made all the difference. So if you're listening to this and something in your life feels off, if the air has changed and you can't quite explain why, don't ignore it. You don't need to panic. You don't need to confront anyone immediately. You just need to pay attention. Because the truth doesn't require force. It only requires time. And if you give it that, it will always find its way to the surface, just like it did for me. I'm still here. And that, in the end, is the outcome they never saw coming. The last thing I learned from all of this is something no one ever really teaches you. Your life doesn't end when someone betrays you. It only ends if you let their choices define your future. I didn't rebuild by becoming harder. I rebuilt by becoming clearer. Clear about who I allow close. Clear about what peace actually feels like. Clear about the fact that survival is not weakness, it's quiet strength. There was a time when I thought being loyal meant enduring anything. Staying silent. Letting things slide. Giving the benefit of the doubt even when my instincts were screaming. Now I know better. Loyalty without truth is just self-erasure. They planned my death thinking I would never see it coming. Thinking I was too tired, too trusting, too ordinary to notice. But ordinary people notice more than anyone realizes. We just don't announce it. I didn't scream. I didn't threaten. I didn't disappear. I paid attention. I stayed alive. And I let the truth do what it always does in the end. Finish the lie. This isn't a story about revenge. It's a story about refusal. Refusing to be erased. Refusing to be silenced. Refusing to let betrayal have the final word. They planned my death for insurance money. Instead, they lost everything. And I'm still here. Waking up every morning, breathing freely, living a life that finally belongs to me. That's the ending they never planned for.